What's up, Red Letter Disciples? It is Zach Zender, and this is a great podcast because it's going to challenge you to be a greater disciple of Jesus. That's our goal. And this season specifically, we are focused on producing greater disciples in our church body, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and having some really great conversations around what that means. And today's is one of them. We've had Ben Haupt coming on to the podcast. Ben's had a front row seat being in parish ministry, then serving at Concordia Seminary, to now being the CEO of Pastoral Leadership Institute, PLI. He talks about some key points regarding our church body. How do we form pastors today and moving forward, and how moving away from centralization may be the key to greater unity and growth as we walk together in the future. And so can't wait to get to that in a moment. But first, thank you to Child Beyond International, a season 9 sponsor for us. They do incredible work to rescue children, especially children that other great organizations miss. They reach out to the orphaned, the abandoned, the neglected, and the abused. Many of these children come from stories of pain and hopelessness, but through the work they do, they experience rescue, restoration, and ultimately a brand new beginning in the love of Jesus. Children are rescued into safe homes where they, through the work of Child Beyond International, receive meals, education, medical care, and round-the-clock love from an incredible team. And the goal is always to release these children then into safe, loving, forever families, of course, with the love of Jesus through the whole process. Now, here's where you come in. It takes 20 people giving $40 a month to cover the full cost of one child. That's right, 20 of us spending $40 a month to rescue one child. That may seem like a high cost to rescue one child, and it is. And that's exactly the point. This ministry is special and unique, that it really does cost a lot of money from a lot of people to rescue one child, because they're rescuing the children that nobody else is able to rescue. I think it's a beautiful way to reach who Jesus says, the least of these. And so I'm asking you, could you be one of the 20? Or maybe your family could sponsor, take 2 or 3 spots. Or maybe you're a pastor at a church that you want to bring this to your church, and maybe you'll do all 20. Here's the deal. This season, we are doing it through childbeyond.org/RLL. That stands for Red Letter Living, childbeyond.org/RLL. And together we're seeing, can we rescue a child? Can we rescue more than one child? Can we restore their future and release them into the life God has for them? I hope that you get to be a part of that, or at least look into it and pray about it and see if it might be where God is calling you and maybe even your church to participate in. This season is an amazing season, and I'd love to know, what do you think? I'm really using this platform, this podcast, stewarding it in whatever direction God leads. And sometimes the way we see God leads is, what do the people need and what do the people want? What are they asking for? And so I'm looking at my numbers. I'm looking at subscribers. I'm looking at followers. I'm looking at video views. I'm looking at shares. I'm looking at comments. Just to know, is this a great direction for future seasons? Do we want more conversations that are Lutheran Church Missouri Synod focused? Anyway, I'd love to hear from you. You can email hello@redletterchallenge.com if you have any thoughts on any of those. But obviously, the more you watch and share and like and comment and rate, review, and follow and subscribe, and whatever other words there are, the more that helps me know exactly what to do with the next season and moving forward. So without further ado, let's get to today's podcast with Ben Haupt. Well, welcome to the Red Letter Disciple. We got a great guy today. His name is Ben Haupt, and he's a buddy of mine, and love his voice and his unique journey. So right now he is serving as the Global Executive Director of PLI, Pastoral Leadership Institute, but he's also held roles working in our seminary in St. Louis and been in parish ministry at a couple of places down in Florida and Georgia. And as a friend of mine, we first met, you remember, Ben, when we first met? It was at a conference around college ministry in the LCMS. That actually was a thing. You remember those days?
Oh, man, I do. And that was was that 2007 or 8, something like that?
Yeah, gosh, it's got to be one of those years. Yeah.
I was in Boca Raton at the time, and I left Boca Raton in 2008. So it had to have been sometime before 08.
Yeah, there you go, buddy. Well, it's great to have you on the podcast. And so, yeah, I shared a little bit, like real bullet pointed there, but talk to us a little bit about your journey in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and how you got to kind of where you are today.
Yeah, so I'll back up even further. So I was born into a Lutheran family, baptized at a month old at a congregation in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and grew up in what I didn't realize that Fort Wayne was different than other places in the world. But like, come to find out, if you wanted to have a soccer game, you could just get a whole bunch of Lutherans together, and you wouldn't just have like two teams. You'd have a citywide league. So I grew up playing soccer and basketball and running track only ever against Lutherans. That's how Lutheran I am, right? I went to a Lutheran grade school, Lutheran high school, LCMS college, Concordia, Wisconsin, and I didn't have a day outside of the LCMS educational system until I started work on my PhD through the University of Birmingham in England. So yeah, I've spent some time with the LCMS. I like our crowd, and I also know my warts and all of our collective warts together very well.
Yeah, it's good. And I think that when we talk about Lutheran stuff, and especially you and I are both wired for change, which you'll hear in our conversation today, I think a lot of it that people need to remember is, you've grown up Lutheran. I'm fourth generation Lutheran. We've got a lot at stake here that we've been in, and that's part of the problem, I think, is that sort of questioning, sort of how Lutheran are you? Just because we may do things different or push envelopes or ask questions that we feel like people ought to be answering, and maybe we need better answers for. And so I love hearing that in your story too, that this is not, something you became all of a sudden, and it's not that important. This is your family. This is what you grew up in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say I'm 47. I have only grown in appreciation for the Lutheran confessions and how they articulate what the Bible means. So people ask, what kind of a subscription do you have for the confessions? I'm all in on the Lutheran confessions. I'm a quia subscriber to the confessions because they are, I think, a great way to explain what the scriptures mean. And I find more and more wisdom in the scriptures, and especially in the way the confessions describe and interpret the scriptures every day. So I'm actually pretty comfortable in my Lutheran clothes, and I hope that I can invite Lutherans to even think a little bit maybe differently, but yeah.
And that's kind of a big piece of my world. Just my belief is that confessional and missional don't have to be at odds, and they can actually go together, and you can be both at the same time, even if you're more maybe wired towards one way or the they're still very important. And I kind of use those terminology in one of a video I made, like protectors and proclaimers. We need both of them, and we are both of them. If you go through our process, you become both of them. At least you ought to. And so, hey, I think you've had a really unique vantage point, right? You've kind of shaped future pastors in the classroom, and now you're investing in leaders with PLI, and you've also been in parish ministry leading. And so I think that makes you a really great person to take an honest look at pastoral formation right now in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And a recent survey that I conducted with more than 1,050 Lutheran leaders, that sort of finding and forming future pastors was the third most urgent challenge. It feels like maybe from a microphone standpoint or in conversations I'm in, it's maybe the most prominent of the challenges that we're talking about or trying to talk about. And so I want to start here. In that same survey, right, nearly half gave our current pastoral formation routes a low confidence score, 1 or 2 out of 5. And less than 30% rated them 4 or 5 out of 5, having confidence. About 20% was in that neutral. So why do you think confidence is so low in our current formation process?
Well, it's a fantastic question. I'm excited for the questions that we're going to dive into. One little caveat that I just want to give a shout out to all your listeners. I'm sure that there are some of your listeners that love me and agree with most of what I usually say, but I also expect that you will have listeners that are listening along and that are maybe concerned about what you're going to say, or are even very, very skeptical. And it's to those people that I would appeal to just for a second, to say, I want to appeal to you, brothers and sisters, on the basis of the scriptures, and that we would talk together about what the scriptures mean for where we're at now. So before I dive into all that, I just wanted to kind of give that caveat to say, I love all your listeners and all the reasons why they're listening. And I'm excited, even if they're listening with some skepticism, I'm excited they're listening to your podcast and that they're hearing your voice and that I have an opportunity to speak to them. So
that's a huge part, Ben. I think before you get in, like my hope is that, there are going to be some people that are like-minded that I bring on. There's going to be some people that are not like-minded that have a different mindset. And part of the whole goal of this for me in this season, especially, is that we just continue to have conversations and listen to both sides. Yeah. And so I appreciate, you saying that as well. So go for it. Yeah. You were on a roll. I stopped you.
Oh no, that's awesome. I love it. So here's what I think is the biggest challenge facing pastoral formation and why some people might be dissatisfied. I want to say there's a lot of people in our church body that are working on pastoral formation. Before I came to PLI a year ago, I was serving Concordia Seminary as the associate provost for enrollment management. And my whole job was to figure out and to listen to the church and to serve the entire church around what does pastoral formation look like, sat in all the meetings with the regents so I'm super invested in this conversation. I think the biggest thing that people who are somewhat disgruntled or dissatisfied with the current system is around the idea that we should send our best and brightest students to the seminaries, and then we are essentially sacrificing them for the church, and these congregations are likely not to get them back. I think that is the biggest challenge. I don't think people are dissatisfied primarily with the content of the curriculum. There will always be things that people will complain about, but I think they're very concerned that they might send their best and brightest to the seminary and never see them return.
And do you feel like most the people that are like thinking about wanting to be pastors, are they wanting to be pastor or serve in their context, or is it more a general, like, I feel called by God and I want to go to seminary and wherever God leads, God leads?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, where we currently are with a really diverse set of practices, not beliefs. I think we're very aligned for the most part around our confessions, but the way worship gets practiced, the way that the Lord's Supper gets administered, some of these things there are some pretty significant differences. And so if, for example, a person raised up in a congregation that never heard the organ in church and never sang out of the Lutheran service book to go to the seminary and be told this is all that there is and that it's unfaithful if you do anything else, I think that is a big challenge. And then I think congregations are right to say, I'm not sure that I would want the best and the brightest of our congregation to be told that everything that they did in their home congregation was unfaithful.
Yeah, if it's topsy-turvy and they're expecting one thing and it's a totally opposite thing, that's challenging. I think, that's super good. And so one thing that also surprised me is the respondents gave, because a lot of times what we hear about, is that the residential model is the quote gold standard. And I think a lot of us, when we hear that, we kind of roll our eyes because we're like, I don't know if it is. And I say that as someone who went to residential and had a good but not perfect experience at seminary. I think it certainly could have been improved. However, I'm really grateful for what it did for me. But one thing that was surprising is, at least in the folks that took my survey, there was a higher confidence rating in the SMP route than the residential route. And so why do you think that, like, if one is labeled the gold standard and the other is kind of seen as less than, honestly, by a lot in our denomination, like, what does that say around just, are we emotionally intelligent to get this right? Is it the gold standard? Is SMP the gold? Like, just walk me through. I'm struggling with that.
Yeah. So again, I think if you were to ask those same people, is it primarily about the curriculum that you have significant challenges with the MDiv versus the SMP curriculum? My guess is that out in the church, people don't know the differences between the curriculum. I know what the curriculum map between the two programs is, or at least was up until a year ago. And it's complicated, but I don't think that there are significant differences. I think the SMP program and the MDiv program, as they were written over the last 5-10 years, were really solid curricula. I think that the people that you talked to were primarily interested in contextual education because they knew that that is the place where the people that are being formed for ministry would, on a week in and week out basis, still be in the kinds of settings that they find compelling and helpful to reach their local context. Here's something that talking about the gold standard, that's come up in a lot of conversations, and I've heard both of our seminary presidents, Thomas Egger and John Bruss, use that terminology. Dr. Bruss has even recently said that residential education is not the gold standard, but the standard. And I think I understand why these fine brothers in Christ are concerned. I think a huge part of it is they are concerned for small congregations that might not have somebody that could be grown up from within the congregation, and so for the sake and for the love of the entire church body, they're concerned for those smaller congregations to make sure that every congregation that wants a pastor could get a pastor. I will say that I very much appreciate that concern. I served my first congregation, is a very large congregation, 1,000 people in church on a weekend, part of the then mega church conference. But my second congregation, they were 80 in worship when I arrived there in 2008. And so I've served a small congregation. I know what the challenges of small congregations are. I have a heart for small congregations. But here's my thought on what we've effectively done in the synod with talking about the gold standard, but much more with formulating rules around the colloquy program, where the rule now currently, whether it's spoken out loud or whether it's only spoken in private meetings, the rule I've heard is that if you were LCMS and you went to any other seminary besides the two residential seminaries, you will never qualify for colloquy ever. And here's my strong pushback to that. I think that is borderline communism. Here's what I mean by it. Though there is great concern for the small congregations, forcing people with rules, coercing people with regulations at synodical convention is essentially economically like distributism. You pile all the money together, or in this case, all the seminary students, and then the centralized government gets to disperse all these students out to the church. That's communism, socialism. I think Americans don't really love that model, especially members of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, who are a strong proportion of them are much more in the conservative approach. and kind of an anti-socialist, anti-communist approach. So my hunch is that people feel like they're being coerced by the system, even though there might be some legitimate concern behind that, and that people are starting to kind of push back against the heavy rules and regulations to kind of force people into this gold standard approach. And that's where I think we have to be really careful that we don't push congregations beyond what they are joyfully ready to do. If a congregation's joyfully ready to send a young man to the seminary and they don't need him for their local purposes, what a rich blessing. But like Paul said in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, I would not command you, right? He said, when you give to the poorer brothers and sisters in Judea, I want you to give because you're excited about it, right? God loves a cheerful giver. So if you're going to give up a young man from your congregation and you're doing it cheerfully, fantastic. God bless you. But I don't think we should coerce and command our congregations to give up their brightest and best.
Yeah, and I think too, to go alongside of that, Ben, right? In the last 15, 20 years especially, and COVID just exacerbated it. We've gone away from sort of like this trust in institution and more control, more power, and that's just not the world we live in anymore. And it's not the world that our young Gen Z, Gen Alpha have ever seen. And so that's a little bit of a dynamic that I don't think we're talking about enough as well, is like the whole structure of this centralized leadership and power amongst a smaller number of people that represent the institution is just not something that is popular or accepted amongst younger generations. And if we're reverting more and more back to something that the culture is kind of going up against, I just struggle to see how we can have any future, if that makes sense. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I totally agree with what you're saying. I'm very allergic to institutions. I have recently gotten involved with the Acton Institute, and I love the Acton Institute because Lord Acton was this guy that famously said, "Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely." And he wasn't saying that about any one particular leader. I'm not either. But just in general, the more you centralize control and power and authority, the worse it stinks. And so I have a bleeding heart for people on the margins, and I have been compelled by doing things for people in the margins because they're on the ropes. But the best way to do that is to decentralize and make things smaller. And that's not just a current cultural moment. I actually think I might be, what was your distinction between the protectors and proclaimers?
Yeah.
Zach, I might fall into the protector category for a second.
Yeah.
Maybe some people would be surprised to hear me say that, but I think we've lost sight of the founding vision of the LCMS. So CFW Walther in 1852 goes over to visit Wilhelm Leah, and they have this huge falling out, essentially over polity, over a question of how should the larger church be run. And Walther basically just said, I don't agree with Leah's vision for this very centralized approach to church leadership. There are a lot of people in our church body that are more and more appreciating what Wilhelm Leah said, and even would argue that it was all just a misunderstanding or such. Well, when after Leah and Walther had this falling out, Walther got in touch with this guy, Friedrich Brunn, and I didn't know about him. I never heard about him in the seminary. But after they had this falling out, Friedrich Brunn was writing all this stuff about free churches and congregationalism among Lutherans in Germany. And Wyneken sent his son to teach at Friedrich Brunn Seminary. So I'm actually I'm going to be protector for a second and say, LCMS, we've lost the vision to centralize control and to create all this hierarchy, and then to make the argument that if you're not following synod and convention, that you're somehow not loving your brothers and sisters in Christ. I think we've lost the vision for what Walther and Wyneken had for our church body. So I'll be the persnickety historical protector.
I love that. No, we need that, and I think that's important for us to kind of understand where things started and where they've come. It's just like if you just look at things kind of 30,000 foot view and there wasn't history, is this set up the way that we need it to be set up for the future? And I'm like, oh man, I don't know. Because to get to, kind of hone in on a little bit of what you talked about, obviously there's residential, there's SMP, there's concern and push to the residential to fill our small churches. And great, small churches need a pastor too. But there's not trust amongst large churches to the seminary, and I would say alternative from seminary to the large churches. And so, there's this pushback that I'm seeing that a lot of the large churches don't want to just send to residential because the program's not really set up to fill a pastor that they need in their context. It's set up to kind of be a rural small town, which is, again, we need those churches, but they're just different. To me, they're serving different purposes. Yeah. And we need a variety of pastoral training that with still the great theology underneath it that can support, yes, the small churches, but also the growing churches, the larger churches, the medium-sized churches. Otherwise, if we're just forming small church only, there's not going to be a future. If we're just forming, large churches only, that's not Christ loving or caring for the ones that can't, grow to those sizes, that still need a pastor in their community. And so I think where I'm struggling is just this centralization. It's got to be this way when the system itself is not set up to support our entire denomination, and as a result, it's not supporting local church mission anymore. Yeah. And I think that's where I'm really struggling. This is probably the first time I've felt like in my ministry that being a part of Synod, the structure that it has is not a benefit, and it's not neutral. It's actually a negative for my local church to accomplish its vision to start new churches, if there are no pastors or we can't form them in ways that make sense. And so anyway, I know a huge piece of this is around there's, obviously there's residential, there's SMP. Colloquy's been a lot harder to get guys through. And so as a result of that, there's been a whole lot of movement and conversation around online. Do we have an online Master's of Divinity? Can we make that happen? In my survey, closer to 61% said that they'd like to see an online Master's of Divinity. 20% unsure, 20% didn't want to see that. And so I'm just trying to think, if there's a large chunk of people that want this, how can we walk together and ignore a large growing voice, if that makes sense? Or what do we do in this situation? Tell me.
Yeah, I've been a part of lots of conversations around the merits or demerits of online versus residential education. And there's a lot of talking past one another. There's a lot of, well, what about this report? And what about this report? There was some work done by a think tank that is associated with the Association of Theological Schools called Not Being There. And they did some data research on online education, distance education, theological education, whether it could actually form people for ministry. And so I've talked in other places and argued until I'm almost blue in the face about, what's the best way, and can stuff happen online? And there we get into these debates that unfortunately just kind of generate more and more ire, and people, they had an experience, or they don't think, they got this kind of an education, and so they can't imagine it working for somebody else. I want to go like really deep to the foundations. There was a guy in the early church. Oh, I'm having sorry, give me just a second.
Maybe you're getting them excited now.
Mabel, go out. Mabel, out. Colin.
You're good. We can pause it here. We're good for a sec, bro.
All right, watch out. Let's go. Thanks, man.
Mabel's got some thoughts. I think let's welcome him.
Gosh, she was so good. I had almost forgotten she was there. And then my son came home. All right, so you can edit some of that out.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, you're talking about a guy. There was a guy.
Yeah, there was a guy. So there was a guy in the early church named Polycarp, and he said that he appreciated the living voice over what had been written. And, for the most part, I think we all would agree with that like, it's great to be in person and to give somebody a hug, to see them live out their life in Christ, to share with them face to face, eyeball to eyeball, and not have screens in the way. And yet, we have the Holy Scriptures. Paul wrote a letter to Timothy and said, don't let anybody look down on you because of your age. Now, I want to ask these people that say online education cannot form people for ministry, whether they believe that the Scriptures are effective as the written Word of God to accomplish God's purposes. I think they are. I have a subscription to the
confessions. I go yes on that too, just in case anyone's wondering my views.
Good.
Yeah.
So the written Scriptures, where somebody sat down, wrote a letter, and then delivered it to somebody else, that word got through to Timothy, right? So much that the church said, not only was it good for Timothy, like all Christians should read this letter. And I've never met Paul in my life, and he's still forming me in the faith. So let's be done with all these debates about whether somebody can be formed or not. I worry that actually what people are talking about is this like emotional formation, and that can somehow only happen in person. That is just a strange argument to me. We believe Lutherans are people of the Word, and the Word is what forms people, not hugs or seeing eye to eye, eyeball to eyeball. All that's good stuff. I give thanks to God for our bodies, but there's lots of ways to form people. So the whole debate about is online good or bad, I think 20 years from now, people will look back at this argument and say how silly that the church wasn't talking about how the Scriptures form people, and we were talking about the most recent kind of trendy study about what went well or what didn't go well on online education. I just think that is we have to move beyond that.
Yeah, and I think too, like what I love about that answer is, how can you and I remove ourselves from the equation, and where can we anchor, right? And that's got to be in Scriptures.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, is when I think we have these subjective feelings that get in the way, that, like you said, maybe it's an emotional response, or maybe it's a personal thing, preference, if you will. Part of the reason why, like, I did that survey was at the end of the day, like I do have a voice, and so do you, and we ought to use our voices to be influential for Christ when we can. But I actually don't want people to hear or know my voice near as much as like I'm just trying to bring an objective, collective voice to this that's representative of 1,054 leaders
Yeah.
that are really struggling right now, that really do genuinely care, that each of us have a backstory in this Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and want it to succeed, and are tired of our voices either being silenced or pushed to the side, or if it ever gets a voice, kind of, just sort of hearing it, but moving on as if they didn't.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. Like, we can have conversations all day long, but if it's only ever we're going to stick to this, or maybe even revert backwards to sort of, I don't know, calm or quiet the forward thinking people, like clearly there's got to be something different. And again, my voice was heard in what I just said, but that's what the 1,054 collectively are saying, even if it's not every single one of them. And so there's formation, yes, and we could argue about ways in which to do that. I'm curious. Again, I like to look at objective data to kind of, if let's start with the scriptures, and if the scriptures, if there's wiggle room or it's not black or white, let's go to objectivity and not subjectivity. I actually don't know, so I could be, maybe the data you're about to tell me would be anti the direction that I want to go. But like, what did that data? You said it was the survey. What was it? The not
Yeah,
something.
it's called Not Being There. I can send you a link
Okay.
and we can put it
Were
in the
there a
show
couple of
notes.
key highlights, or was it like?
Yeah, the highlights basically are that because online education, you have to work a little bit more intentionally to get people to connect on kind of a human level, and it's not just a data dump, and there's this kind of interactivity. A lot of online theological programs are based around cohorts where the cohort goes through together. That's true of the SMP program, as well as things like EIIT and CHS. This study found that people who go through an online theological education program are sometimes even better formed in kind of those the personal kinds of things, because they had to work so extra hard at it to make sure that the professor was engaging every person. I mean, man, I taught at the seminary for 12 years. There were gobs of guys that sat in my classes, and for whatever reason, they weren't super engaged, and they came to class, they did their work, they left, and I just didn't have gobs of interaction with them. There were others that I certainly did, but I think with online theological education, you can't get out of it, and so they actually found that online theological education accomplishes outcomes. Like, let's set outcomes, then let's measure outcomes, and let's like run some experiments in the church,
Yeah.
rather than just having these debates about what's right or wrong. That's why I love your approach to data. It's just like, well, what are you going to do with these 1,050 people that feel like they're not really being well served by the current pastoral formation routes?
That's good. And Ben, I know your role now is like, not only were you instrumental in kind of the formation of those seminary years, but now your work at Pastoral Leadership Institute focuses on, helping to develop and grow pastors long after they've graduated. And I think that's really important because, again, looking at the data, 30% of leaders express high confidence in our formation process, which hopefully means there's more of that happening after seminary and into the first decade of ministry. And so what changes do you think we need to make, both at seminary, but also after the fact, when it comes to further leadership development or growth pastorally?
Yeah, this is, I'll give an answer that I gave at the seminary, and I haven't changed my thinking on this much at all. In 2017, we were doing a curriculum review at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis, and so we asked a large every other year, the entire CSL faculty would get together with the Council of Presidents, all the district presidents, the synodical president, vice presidents, and we asked them what in their determination is we asked them is exactly this question. What do we need to work on at the seminary to better prepare students to go out into ministry? And it was really interesting. I hate to talk about parties, and I don't want to try to perpetuate parties. Paul was very clear that parties in the church are bad, and yet reality is we know that there are kind of sides of the aisle, that there are districts that are on either side of the aisle, right? So what was fascinating to me was that across the board, like district presidents and districts that would probably have pretty different styles of ministry, all of them stood up and essentially said leadership. That's the thing. They gave gobs of great feedback about interpreting the scriptures, understanding the church's doctrine, being able to use the history of the church to explain our theological position, and even things like preaching. They gave, there are always outliers, and there are always places where people can improve in all of the four disciplines. But the thing that they said that most often wrecks congregations or wrecks pastors' ministries is by and large that they are not good leaders. These guys that got in trouble. And so we actually added a second course in leadership at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. And as far as I know, they're still teaching 2 courses to every MDiv student. I think that's probably as much as they could do. I wrote one of those courses, and from what I understand, it's still basically being
that's double what it was, which was 1 course.
Double
now
what it was, yeah. But I think
it's in the
there's
right direction, at least. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
I think there's only so much that you can teach in leadership before somebody gets into the parish, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can show them like how to read a budget statement, but when I had a student call me up one time that said, Dr. Haupt, can you believe it? They don't have a budget, and like we're not going to be able to make payroll next week. What do I do? That's when the rubber hits the road. And so if I were to answer the question of what should we improve, I actually think that by and large, the curricula of our pastoral formation routes are pretty solid. And I don't think that we should jam pack more into them. I also don't think that we should vacate them with, of things like interpreting the scriptures, learning Greek and Hebrew. All those things are super important. Those are the things that a pastor will not get once they get out of the seminary. I think leadership education needs to be a continuing ed kind of thing. And so my answer is I don't want to force people to do continuing education. I think forcing and coercion is not the way of the church. And it's not, even though sometimes it's efficient or effective, I want to evangelically encourage as many people as possible to get leadership education and training so that they can fulfill the ministry that God has given to them in Christ in their local context.
That's good. How would you kind of then, switching gears a bit, but the number one challenge on the survey was reaching and retaining young adults. And so, how would you answer, how do we reach and retain not just young adults, but youth and young adults in our synod right now? What can we be doing to ensure that we're still, Lutheran in our confessions and in our doctrine, but relevant to a group of people that has grown up, with different things in their generation than you and I and older have grown up with?
Yeah, I think young people, and I have two of them in my house, teenagers. I get to talk with them all the time about all the challenges that they're facing and going through in their day and age. I think there's one answer to that would be we need to go back to being super traditional and stand for truth and just reject falsehood out of hand. And the more that we do that, people will be drawn to us because we have conviction. I think that that's partially right, and I do think that the church has sometimes erred on the side of not ever getting around to saying what we believe is right and how people should live and how people should believe. But as much as that draws maybe some that's really working well for a group of young men that are like Jordan Peterson fans and that are huge fans of this kind of resurgence of conservatism. I worry that that movement has some potential for radicalizing and that it could very quickly and very easily lead to extremism. I'm concerned about that. Conservatism that's my approach. I love it. But anything can become radicalized, especially in this age. I think the best thing that the church can do is to be in conversation with people. And I don't just mean kind of a soft relationalism. I think like talking to people is good. Like we should have good bedside manner and not be weird and stuff. But like, I actually want the church to not retreat from culture to the point where we don't even know what the conversation is. I think that actually, there's a certain group of our church body that wants to take it in that direction and just like fingers in the ears. And we're going to, like, let's go ultra rural and get out of the cities because they're evil. That I don't see that as the scriptural approach to kind of continue with my theme of let's go back to the scriptures. The apostles all went to these large cities that were filled with sin. I mean, they went to the Las Vegases and the New York cities of their age, and they had real conversations. And I mean, you can read the stuff that Paul's trying to get the members of his congregations that he started to stop doing. And I mean, some of it's like really crass sin, like don't have a sexual relationship with your mother-in-law. Well, that's if you have to tell somebody that, that's kind of shocking, right? I don't think that needs to be said in most LCMS congregations today. So I would love for us to welcome in the rougher folks that didn't grow up Lutheran and didn't grow up on a farm. Let's welcome in people and have real conversations about things. And this is where I think we need to have something besides just the one divine service with Holy Communion, where we invite new people in to just have conversation about real things of life. Let's meet them out there. That young people need Christians to walk alongside them and get into the mess of life, especially where they face so much darkness. And if we could wander back out into the darkness and be a light in some really dark places, I think that's where the church will continue to keep connected to young people.
Do you feel like our Lutheran theology is relevant to culture?
It is. It's so crazy relevant to culture because the very root of our theology is that Luther faced the darkest of times, right? He despaired of life. He was depressed. He thought that God had completely abandoned him. And so our theology, like theology of the cross, is so beautiful for talking people through that are going through moments of just utter darkness, because there's no place that somebody can go and not get away from or get away from God. Psalm 139, right? Even if I make my bed in the pit of hell,
Yeah.
there God will find me. Our Lutheran theology embraces that. We're not this, if we were kind of all in on the like, hey, make a decision for Jesus, then man, you gotta get way out of that pit before you're gonna decide to follow Christ, right? If we were Pelagians and that sort of thing, that's not our theology. Our theology is like Jesus Christ climbed down into the pits of hell to find people. And I think that is as relevant for today in all of our post-Christendom and postmodern wreck of a society that we live in.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's where I'm struggling as a whole, because it's such beautiful theology that is so, gospel centered and reaching to those that could not be reached. And yet a lot of our, I don't know, conversations or attempts, at what growth for our denomination looks like, it's much more inclusive, and it's much more, nothing wrong with having more kids, like great, do that. But I just feel like when that's the biggest answer to kind of solve our overarching problem is have more babies, that we're missing out on just this low-hanging fruit of how good our gospel is, and the call to all of us have to actually just share it with others and to do it in relevant ways, and to be producing pastors that can teach how to do that. And so, yeah, any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do have a thought. It kind of takes us back to some of the pastoral formation stuff. There was a colleague of mine. I won't mention him. Some people probably know who said this, but he famously said that back in the day, maybe 15 years ago, one seminary was essentially formed to form pastors. That was their vision, was to form pastors for a very particular way of doing ministry. And the other seminary, their vision was to free people for ministry. And the idea there was give them the scriptures and the confessions, give them all the education that we can, but then they go out and they figure out how to take the Word of God and our understanding of the scriptures through the Lutheran confessions, and they figure out how to apply that in their local context. My worry in this kind of crazy society that we live in, that gets darker and darker every day, is that the idea of forming people for a really kind of like do exactly this becomes really compelling for people that are scared about all the changes that are happening and how quickly they're happening in our society. And I think there's a pull toward the forming people for ministry approach. I would submit that both of our seminaries look more and more like that. Let's just give them a very specific way to do ministry, only using the Lutheran service book, and you don't need to use any of your theological thinking as you're planning worship. Just use it straight out of the book. I worry that that's exactly the wrong approach for the high change that we're in, and it's not to just capitulate to culture, right, and to just go all in to kind of be relevant and to win people over and this sort of thing. No, I actually think that the scriptures and the confessions ground us so well that we're freed then to meet people exactly where they're at, and we have all this theology that we're not just like compelled to say it because somebody at seminary said like this is the way. Maybe they even like pounded their fist on a podium and said, no, this is the way it is. That's I think the exact wrong approach. What we need is this incredibly generous, open-handed. Here's our theology. We want you to drink deeply from it so that you can go out and be these streams of living water. Crazy enough, Jesus thought that the woman at the Samaritan well could be a person from whom the living waters of God himself, the voice of God himself, could flow. And it did. She went to her community and she said, look at the person that I met. It's amazing. So I'm all for freeing people for ministry. I'm all for freedom. That's kind of my shtick. So yeah.
So kind of sum it up then, Ben, if you could redesign, like we're just starting over. And it's 2025 now, obviously. So we're going to do it with a 2025 lens. But what would LCMS pastoral formation look like 10 years from now? And how would it have addressed our pastoral shortage and also engage with the youth that the challenges that we're facing?
I think I would double down on scriptures and confessions and history and be much less prescriptive in the practical department. That's the practical department is the department that I served with for 12 years. But I think that, and I still think there are a lot of folks in the practical departments of our seminary that would agree with this approach. But I think that the magic is really our theology. So have people drink deeply from the scriptures, have them learn Greek and Hebrew, have them, and I think you can do this online. I have done a lot of online education in my life, and it worked well for me. You can push people really. People are using Duolingo and they're learning languages like crazy. So have people go even deeper into scriptures, into the confessions. We neglect the confessions to our detriment. It's not an old crusty book. It's a living book, and it has gobs of wisdom. So I would have people spend gobs of time there and let the practical ministry be largely taught by people in residence that know the particular context where the particular student is doing ministry. So this looks very different if you're on the plains of North Dakota or Nebraska, and I have friends that are in ministry there. I know it's challenging. Some of those towns are emptying out. They have meth problems because there's not a robust vision for people in rural areas. But that's one kind of context. The inner city of our large cities around the country or our suburbs, these are very, very different places. And so I would way rather have most of practical theology be taught at the local level and spend even more time in scriptures, confessions, history.
That's good. So what I'm hearing you say, which I think again is kind of the argument sometimes on the other opposite end, is I'm not hearing anything about you watering down or making it easier or less. I'm just hearing the model and method may be different, and the practical side of it certainly can be rethought, which I think is important. Cool, Ben. Anything you want to say you didn't say, or any question I didn't ask that you wish I would have asked that you're like, I wanted to talk about this?
Just that I would appeal to the listeners of this podcast to participate in our church body, to participate in conversations, to do exactly, Zach, what you did. Put a video out there, put yourself out there, start a podcast, start some conversations. Tim Allman and Joe Barron, there's a bunch of guys that are out there mixing it up, having great conversations. I recently came across a Facebook post of a friend of mine. He and I kind of have the same mentor, and he was thinking, some of these new approaches to pastoral formation are really bad for our church and they should be absolutely denounced. And then And then he talked to his mentor and who is involved in some of these newer approaches. And when he talked to him, his mind got changed a little bit. And so I would plead for conversation. I thought that the idea, I think it was Herb Mueller, whose son I went to seminary with back in the day, Bert, good guy. Herb Mueller Jr. was, I believe, the person that came up with this koinonia project where congregations kind of on both sides of the aisle were getting together to talk about theology. Man, would I plead for our church body to institute those conversations. And then I would also just plead with your listeners to participate in synod and convention. I think a lot of the problems in our church body came because sort of what I would call legislation got pushed through, and it stinks. And it's all about centralized power. And I would plead to anybody that if you think you are in power, always think about when you're not going to be in power and what you want the policies to be like when you're no longer in power, and vote for that kind of legislation. Small regulation, high focus on our theology is where I would have us go. Please, 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 I'm begging the leaders of our church body, please don't coerce us or cajole us or command us to do things by regulation. That is damaging the congregations of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and you're losing people who are faithful to the scriptures and the Lutheran confessions because of the commanding and the cajoling and the coercing. I'm begging you, please lead with the gospel. Please lead with the scriptures. So much good. Fun.
I want to land it there. Thank you for saying that, and for your heart, man, in what you're doing, and it's making a difference. And so, hey, if people want to connect with you, Ben, and things you're working on, what you're doing, where can they find you?
Yeah, come to plileadership.org. plileadership.org is our website. You can find my email address there, ben@plileadership.org. Shoot me a message. I'd love to connect. I'd love to have a Zoom with anybody that thinks that I'm crazy or wants to talk theology, or maybe even is really frustrated with what I said. Reach out to me. Let's make some time. I'm on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or X, YouTube. I have a shout out to my podcast, which is Bitcoin Reformation Podcast. You can talk about Bitcoin with me any time of the day. So yeah, I'm out there all over on social media.
Awesome, bro. Well, I'm gonna check out the Bitcoin thing, and I never got in on that, and I wish I would have early on. But anyway, we maybe
not too late.
We got in on things earlier on in our denomination, 20 years from now. But anyway,
never too late. Never too late. Great talking with you, Zach. Thank you very much for all you're doing for our church body.
You bet, Ben. Thanks for being on the Red Letter Disciple. Have a great day, my man.
Thanks, you too.
Well, I am super grateful for the work of Ben Haupt. To connect with Ben and his work at PLI, you can view the show notes at redletterpodcast.com. It's also there that you can connect with our sponsor, Child Beyond International, as we are together hoping to rescue at least one child this season 9. Next week's guest is a returning guest, a great friend of mine, Tim Allman. Tim is a pastor and leader in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod that was asked to be silenced on his views of pastoral formation. So I'll ask him how that felt and how to bring about change, or if it's even possible to bring change in the system that we are in right now. What are his next steps to bring change? And when we, as Lutheran leaders, disagree on things, what are healthy ways to handle conflict? We also take a look at one of those survey pieces, the data that's showing the group most frustrated right now is those of us who are in that 40 to 49-year-old leadership range. Why are we frustrated? It's a great, helpful conversation, and so don't miss it. And the way you don't miss it is subscribe and follow on the audio or video platform of your choice, and we'll see you back next Tuesday for the next episode of the Red Letter Disciple.